Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. We're going to give everybody a moment to start jumping on, and while that's happening, we've got to get set up. This morning, as you can tell by the split screen, I am joined by Glenn Norling, and Glenn will introduce himself in just a moment. Got a lot of really cool stuff to share with you guys this morning, but let's go ahead and get set up. Got the notification that I'm live, so that's pretty cool. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, we got 8 people on already. That's pretty fast. Jason Johnson is on. Good morning, Jason. I put Jason in the Marine Corps. Hope you and your beautiful family are doing well this morning. Gerald out there in Oregon, it is an early morning, Gerald, for you, sir. Oh, my gosh. Will Parker, Montana. John Shriver from Oklahoma. Coin number 1919, which is a good segue for me to say, sponsored today's show is the AmericanWarriorSociety.com. Everything you need for your self-defense needs. Please check us out, AmericanWarriorSociety.com, to find out more how you can become a coin member and get access to the training vault, which has all the self-defense training that you would ever want. And I'm going to tell you right now, if there's ever been a time to learn some of this stuff, it's probably right now. Got Ellen Cowley, retired trooper out there in Virginia. Good morning, sir. Behind the lines in occupied Virginia. Paul is on. Dallas is on. Julie. Dr. John Nadine. Good morning, sir, from San Antonio. Mike Ballard is on. Wow, we got a lot of folks on this morning.
Nice.
Yeah. So, Glenn, welcome to Coffee with Rich, sir.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet everybody today. So, hello.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, sir. So, let's see here. Make sure I got all my intros out of the way. Got all the housekeeping done. Please like and share. Glenn is a retired FBI agent living out, and I won't say where unless Glenn wants us to divulge his location, but he's going to be talking to us about the things that he's into these days and some of the things that he's done in his past. We're excited to have him on the show. Bob Dorn is on. He says, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Linda is on. Says, good morning from a Girl and a Gun Women's Shooting League. Ma'am, good morning to you. So excited to have you on this morning. Julie is on. 17 folks on. Please hit that share button real quick with somebody that needs this information, because Glenn is going to talk to us about some active shooter, how would you describe your active shooter program, Glenn, in a nutshell?
Well, and really what we're trying to do, and here you've got the American Warrior Society, the members here and stuff that are thinking tactically. We're training, we're doing things like that to prepare. But really what this webinar series and what it's called is taking charge of your personal safety and security. And it's designed primarily for the people that don't really have any exposure to thinking tactically. What do we do? We've never really done any kind of emergency planning or anything like that. This is for the school teachers, and my wife's a school teacher, school teachers, people that really just have no exposure to that. And I think there's a huge amount of power in taking somebody who doesn't really think tactically at all and giving them a little bit. They can do a lot of things, and everybody, regardless of what your background is, you can do something in a critical situation. And that's the whole idea, is to kind of walk people through, what do I need to do to plan? What can I do? What options do I have? That's the whole idea behind that webinar series.
Very cool. And speaking of that, we've got 2 new articles up on the site, www.americanwarriorsociety.com. We've got 2 new articles up. One is on riots, and it's written by Mr. Doug Lightfoot, who's a patrol lieutenant up north. And he is sharing with us some of the experience that he's had dealing with these riots and situations like that and what you can do. And we've also got one by David Garrett, who talks to us about some planning and training in situations like that. So we have really jumped into it this morning. Please like and share. Glenn, let's take an opportunity and tell folks a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, again, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Glenn Norling. I retired after 20 years as an FBI agent. Prior to the FBI, I spent 10 years in the Air Force. So when I was in the Air Force, I spent your and my tax dollars buying weapon systems for the Air Force. So had a great time, loved what I was doing in the Air Force, but I was always interested in the Bureau. When I was 14, I had an opportunity to spend a day with an FBI agent through the Boy Scouts that I was very involved in when I was a kid. So I always came back to that. I realized when I went to college, all my friends were cops. I worked with the police department. When I got into the Air Force, I started really being friends with the Air Force Office of Special Investigation agents, the security forces folks, and that brought me to the FBI. And so I entered the FBI in 2000, and I retired just at the end of February of this year. So I've been working as a field agent in a headquarters city. I've worked in a small resident agency, which is our small satellite offices. So an office where we had 6 county territories and 3 of us that actually worked it. So you get to work a little bit of everything. I spent a long time working domestic terrorism investigations when I first started. And then shortly after I started, there's a program within the FBI called the Crisis Management Program, which is basically how you run command posts, how you do critical investigations, how do you do child abduction investigations. And I embraced that, whether it was the anal retentive side of me, the extremely organized side of me that fell into it, but I really embraced that. So that's actually took me from where I started in Sacramento to our critical incident response group, CERG, in Quantico. Worked there in the crisis management unit for a couple years as a supervisor. So got to go around the country deploying to critical incidents and then training our agents all around the country and really the world for that matter, how to deal with critical incidents, how to manage those investigations and things like that. So that led me to a squad supervisory job, actually in Portland. So I spent 4 years in Portland, and as I see everything that's involving in Portland and across the entire state of Oregon, I look at all the places I used to hang out downtown when I was working there, and it's painful to watch sometimes. But did that, and then moved to the small resident agency, and I work in the Lake Tahoe area. So I'm lucky enough to me and my family are lucky enough to live in the glorious area of the Lake Tahoe basin. So that's kind of where I've been. And right now, since I retired, I have a consulting business. It's called TBR Consulting, and we do active shooter training. We do all sorts of these days it's webinars, right? So we're doing webinars on Antifa, on how to do training exercises, which is another big thing that I've done throughout my career. So yeah, it's I've got my finger in a lot of different pots right now. So I really appreciate the conversation today, Rich. Looking forward to the discussion, and thank you everybody for attending.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you. Thank you, Glenn, for being on the show today. Let's see a couple of folks here this morning. Mark says on the road in Ontario, Canada. Julie says thank you for your service, Glenn. And Julie says she's a Christian 2A voice from New York City. Ma'am, glad to have you on the show. Orinda is on. Good morning. Good to have you on the show. Razmik is on. 33 folks joining us live. And I think Mr. Mike Seeklander is also on, if I saw that correctly. Yes, there he is. Thank you, everyone that's joining this one. Please like and share. We have a lot to cover this morning, as you can tell from Glenn's background. So let's talk about your webinar series real quick. Taking charge your own safety and security. Let's dive into that a little bit more, Glenn.
Sure. And what this is, it's a 3-part webinar series, so we build on each one from the basic session. And the first 2 sessions are an hour in length. The last session is about 90 minutes because we get into some pretty specific details, pretty specific situations to discuss. But really starting, we kind of look at a multi-tiered approach. For the basic session, we talk a lot about situational awareness. And what is this big concept of situational awareness out there? It's a fancy phrase for paying attention to what's around. And we talk about what are the critical times when you need to be paying attention to what's going on around you, whether it's a transitional phase when you're going from a building to a car, or you're getting out of your car or something like that. We kind of talk about some of those kind of basics. Again, we're trying to give everybody a baseline here to somebody that really doesn't think tactically at all or anything like that. We start to go through that. We talk about establishing normals, and that's the concept of what's going on the your day-to-day life out there. We talk about certainly a lot about mindset. And welcome back, Rich. Rich kind of faded out there for a second, so glad I didn't argue in at the beginning. So we talk about active threat response options. We talk about which is the stop, drop, and roll of an active shooter incident, right? It's run, hide, and fight. And we talk about that, and we talk about some specific aspects of the hiding, which is barricading, and we talk about being ready for the fight. And that's certainly about one of the main tenets here of the American Warrior Society: be ready for the fight. And we talk about that in there, and then we talk about making a plan in advance, and that's all in that basic course. So it's giving somebody, and one of the things that I'm not a SWAT guy. I like to think of myself as very tactically oriented. I believe that I'm a student of the gun, and I've always felt that way, and that as I believe how we need to have that at heart. So I have the ability to talk to people that don't understand tactics and don't think necessarily like cops and stuff like that. And we actually make a connection. So it doesn't come across as I'm this super Joe tactical. You know, I've got the Seeklander haircut here, of course, but not the goatee. So it's a really great conversation, and you can see the folks that are exposed to this for the first time really start to understand. So this is kind of designed for. Initially, we actually designed this course for non-sworn law enforcement, like dispatchers, analysts, and folks like that, as well as law enforcement family members. But we redesigned the course a little bit, and now it's basically for anybody that's looking to try and prepare themselves. So for American Warrior Society members, it's more for your family, your spouse, your friends, your coworkers, and things like that. And we take and build on each of those. The basic course, in the intermediate course, we start talking a little bit more in detail of things. We talk about kit, we talk about gear, we talk about what options, we talk about tourniquets, we talk about, different concepts like that. And then we get more into the advanced course. We talk about certain situations. We talk about surveillance detection routes in cars. We talk about vehicular movement. We talk about traveling. We talk about concepts like a family safety plan and safety words. If you hear the word pineapple or kumquat, whatever it is, you know what's happening. There's something to pay attention to. We talk about a concept called the gray man concept, and I'm going to actually let you and TC, as you touched on that last week, let you guys go into that in depth. And you know what I consider to be the episode name for part 2 of that discussion. I've shared that with you, Rich. I believe I would say that's No Stones. But so because you marched through that last time, you and admirable, commendable for marching your way through that last time. So that's certainly something for you and TC to get and delve through and things like that. So we talk about all those type of things. We talk about situations in civil unrest. We talk, gosh, I'm going to go look at my list here because I know I'm forgetting some things. We talk a lot about vehicle security and, like I said, the surveillance detection routes. We talk about movement in vehicles and things like that. So the idea is, once you've gone through this whole series of webinars, you've got a plan. You've got lots of tools ready to deal with something, and you never know when something's going to happen. And it's not just active shooter. It's not just something threatening. It can be a traffic accident. Here's how you deal with a traffic crash. Here's how you you're out snowboarding, you're out mountain biking, something like that, and you got a big crash. And okay, here's how you use that tourniquet. Here's how we do that. Here's the kind of kit you need to have to keep yourself safe and do that. So that's kind of the whole gist and the summary of the webinar series.
No, sounds fantastic.
Enough for you?
Yeah, that was great. And if you weren't on last week, the no stones that Glenn was talking about, last week during Coffee with Rich, folks, I was in the midst of passing a kidney stone, and I was in tremendous pain and ended up leaving the show early and went to the hospital, and it was not a good time. And I promise, Glenn, no stones today, my friend.
And you were impressive and very stoic as we went through that episode last week. So kudos to you, my friend. All right, and it's looking to me like Rich is freezing up here just for a couple seconds. So I'm gonna kind of plow through and march on a little bit while he's hopefully getting himself back technically corrected. It looks like he's back now. Hey, there he is. I knew I could jabber long enough that I could get you back in. Welcome back, sir.
Not sure what's going on this morning. Of course, we live out in the county, Glenn, as you may or may not know, and the Wi-Fi is horrific out here. Let's welcome some of the folks that are joining us this morning. John says, good morning, Rich and Glenn. Hard to concentrate with all that's going on, but always time for the show. God bless America. Julie says she is sharing with her Facebook groups. Matt says, good morning. Jody says, good morning. Dan from Flower Branch, Georgia is on. Good morning, Dan. We also have David is on, South Carolina. Good morning, sir. Brett from LA out there in California. Hannah, good morning. She's a dispatcher here. Good to have you. Julie is on. Wow, lots of people on this morning.
Nice.
Yeah, 38 folks. Please like and share real quick. We are just getting beginning. So I like the intent of the webinar series. I think is phenomenal for those that are not sworn officers, maybe don't have necessarily a deep military background, but it gives them something that they can do. And one of the things that I would kind of toss out to you, Glenn, is it's great to know these skills, but I think a lot of Americans forget that it's not going to be your avatar or the most idealized version of yourself that's going to go through this critical incident or this horrific event. It's going to be you. So I think I would ask your opinion on this. Where does physical fitness and taking care of oneself and one's chassis, if you will, come into play?
Now, absolutely, there is a significant benefit to how well tuned your combat chassis is, right? So that's one of the things we do talk about. That we touch on that in the series. A lot of it we really are working on mental tuning for that. But absolutely, you want to have options, and the more finely tuned, I wish I could say that, I got up, it's a little early here in California, as you folks in California very well know. I didn't get up and run a 5K before this today, but, I'm going to try and get that in later today. But absolutely. And you got to fight with what you brought. And it's important to do a little introspection to understand kind of what you've got, what capabilities you have, and absolutely training and continuously trying to improve. I talked about, being a student of the gun. Well, unless you're Mike Seeklander, you really don't master the gun. And it's something that you've got to continually work on. And I'd say, even Mike, as you see all of his information out there, he's continually practicing, he's continually training and different things. And, if you're doing a 3-gun or if you're doing IDPA or USPSA, you're focusing on those specific things. But what we try to do is prepare you for what could be an entire spectrum of anything. Again, from the car accident to the mountain bike crash to an active assailant right in front of you. What do you do? And how do you prepare yourself? And you have to train your mind and understand what physical capabilities you have. And again, you fight with what you brought. So how disciplined are you at when you go out? If you have a concealed weapon permit, or if you carry a weapon, do you carry it every single time you go out? Do you have kit with you? Do you have something that has a tourniquet? My wife calls it my bag of crazy that is with me everywhere. When you go walk around perhaps a college campus, we were doing a threat assessment yesterday at a college campus. Do you leave that bag in your car, or are you disciplined and dedicated enough to take that bag with you? But yeah, absolutely. Training, and we oftentimes talk about these things mentally, but if we never actually physically do some of the training and do some of the practicing, how do we barricade a room? How do we move desks around? It sounds kind of simple, but if you don't ever really do it, physical strength, do you have the dexterity to be able to do things like that? And as you go through and do some of the trainings, and that's the whole idea of training, is to get it right so you can't get it wrong anymore, but also to understand and identify those areas where you can improve. As you go through and do some of the trainings, okay, well, I'm having a hard time doing this. Okay, well, there's maybe a place you can focus on with your physical fitness. But we do start with the mind to get your mindset and all that right. And then you kind of go out and do some of the training. Okay, here's how we do. You walk yourself through it. Okay, maybe there's something I need to do here. Maybe I want to work on my endurance. I know, retiring at the end of February, no longer having my mandatory annual fitness test, and with COVID there, I may put on a pound or two, but I'm cognizant of that, and I want to work on that. So yeah, absolutely, that is the combat chassis is key to everything. Especially you talk dexterity for men primarily. As you get into my age, I'm 54. You start to lose a little bit of that dexterity, and you're not really. I'm about as limber as a brick, but I have to keep working on that, and I do.
Yeah. Thank you to the 40 folks that are joining us live this morning on Coffee with Rich. We're joined by Glenn Norling, retired FBI agent, and myself, Rich Brown, the co-host of the American Warrior Show, co-founder of the American Warrior Society. We have a great show for you today. We're just getting started, folks. Also, I wanted to say that if you could please like and share this information with someone that needs it. We're covering a lot of ground this morning, and I think some of it may save your life. Alan says anything that can reach the average citizen and prepare them for the moment. The webinar should be a great tool for that purpose. And Alan was a state trooper in Virginia for over 30 years, so he would know. Let me ask you a quick question here, and we're going to shift gears a moment, Glenn. What is the purpose? Here we are, 2020, as you alluded to before. We're in the middle of the COVID pandemic. For those of you that are watching this video in the future, hopefully it's over. But for those of us that are still stuck in this quagmire and the election and everything that's going on right now, and the cities we've seen burn, I'm setting you up here, Glenn. What is the purpose of law enforcement today, sir?
Well, and I guess you can traditionally talk about, what generally the four principles, the four functions of law enforcement, from enforcing laws, preventing crime, responding to emergencies, and then all the support mechanisms behind it. That's kind of your traditional role of law enforcement. I mean, certainly what we're seeing in today's world, law enforcement is in huge flux about really what are the fundamental purposes of law enforcement, and what are the fundamental roles that society these days wants from law enforcement. Yes, we want some enforcing of laws, but how that's being done is changing very, very significantly these days. From overall public opinion to the interaction with the prosecution, and I think to you folks in Oregon, and I lived there for 4 years, loved it there. My wife's from Oregon originally. It's challenging, especially Billy Williams, who's the United States Attorney for the District of Oregon. I used to work together with him when he supervised the violent crime attorneys when I was there, and significant challenge in trying to maintain law enforcement in a palatable way for the citizens. And certainly you see all the interactions on the federal side, to the state, to the city, and everything like that. And really, it's not just Oregon. I don't want to pick on you guys. I love you guys. But it's really all around the country. And how do we do it? And what is that evolving role of law enforcement going to look like? Yes, there's still going to be enforcing of laws. Those laws are significantly changing right now, though, right? So we're looking at how we're going to be doing that. Yes, there is still that desire to respond to emergencies, but that's starting to look different. We're really, and one thing I do want to talk about a little bit more later as this evolves is the role of technology, and the role of technology integration specifically within law enforcement. You're starting to see these days, it's not so much that there's a push against law enforcement so much, but there's a push against the physical interactions with officers. So that's kind of one of the things where you're starting to see drones responding to 911 calls to try and figure out what's going on. So you're minimizing that contact with, we really don't know what is, which is great from an officer safety perspective in certain ways, but it's not being there yourself, but it's missing that interaction with the potentially the mentally deranged person or something like that. And that's something where we're really, I think, as a society, struggling with. And actually, maybe think of something. When I was doing some reading, preparing for this the other day, I came across a quote. I'm going to throw on my reading glasses for a minute, and I just read just a little bit. Read just a little bit out of this. It says, though it is expected that policemen will be judicious and that experience and skill will guide them in the performance of their work, it is foolish to expect that they could always be both swift and subtle. Nor is it reasonable to demand that they prevail while hoping that they will always handle resistance gently. Police work is, by its very nature, doomed to be often unjust and offensive to someone. Under the dual pressure to be right and to do something, policemen are often in a position that is compromised even before they act. Now, with a little bit of the language is maybe a little different than what we would use today. But this actually came from an essay from the National Institute of Mental Health, written in 1970. So we've been down a very similar road, really not that long in the future. Hey, I was alive in 1970. So we're really going through that right now, and we need to look back to history and make sure that we're studying what we've gone through in the past to see where we need to evolve into the future. But it's a big challenge right now, where law enforcement and what our roles in law enforcement are going to be in the next 5 years. So significant evolution right now.
Yeah, I think we stack up a lot of the solution onto the law enforcement officers themselves. Like, you need better training, you need better. But at what point are we going to say there's with regard to the citizenry, how you deport yourself in public is equally as important as that, because you're going to get out of the law enforcement officer exactly what you put in. For example, there's a viral video of a young woman who is yelling in an officer's face, fascist, fascist, fascist. And he's just standing there taking it. And finally, she just spits in his face. I mean, she's frustrated. She's not getting the response that she's looking for. So finally she just spits whatever bacteria is in her body all over this officer's face in New York City. And of course she's taken into custody. But again, if you deport yourself that way, you're going to get a certain response from law enforcement.
Yeah. And for some reason where we are right now, and that's absolutely appropriate response from law enforcement to that type of behavior. But society right now, that's very unpopular. I mean, how many videos, we've all seen videos over the last month, how many, officer involved shootings you get into the I'm thinking of the one with the bad guys wearing a white t-shirt. It's outside the convenience store. The cop ends up hopping on top of him and then all of a sudden steps back and shoots 4 rounds at him. But unless you watch the super slow motion video, you don't see that subject's got a gun and it's got it in his hand and he's about to get that on the officer. But we make snap decisions on what happened and this and that. We've got to rebuild trust in law enforcement across things, but absolutely how you conduct yourselves. And this is one thing I think everybody at some point is kind of guilty of this, is how many times do we have issues that we could easily solve ourselves with our neighbors, with the guy down the street that's got the dog that walks the dog that never scoops the poop kind of thing. But a lot of times people I'm going to call the cops on them. Let the cops deal with it. I don't want to deal with that, or I don't need to do this. I can talk on my cell phone. How many videos you see of the people get stopped for talking on their cell phones and just lose their crap at the time on the officers, not the officer's fault. But we really need to do some, again, introspection, again, looking at kind of how we're acting. How do we act in public? One of the things I see right now that keeps getting us into trouble is like everybody's mad. Regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, everybody's frustrated. Everybody's mad. Everybody's, we're worried about COVID. We're coming out of that now. So there's angst, there's frustration, there's all that stuff bottled up in there. Everybody's going out itching for a fight. And if we kind of step back from that and say, let's go out, let's be safe, let's take what we want, what we feel that we want to be prepared with us and out there. And let's just do our business. Let's not go out there looking for a fight. And with everybody wearing masks these days, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, wrote about that. I believe that there is a significant level of empowerment and emboldenment by the anonymity provided by wearing masks. I mean, how many people do you see that, somebody 6 feet, wearing a mask? They would never do that without a mask on. So you get more brazen behavior. I liken that to road rage. You're protected by your car. You're frustrated. You're mad. Hey, I got this car that's protecting me. That's my suit of armor. Well, for a lot of people, that mask is becoming kind of a suit of armor. It's the keyboard warrior in person now. So a lot of how we conduct ourselves, we got to look at that. And I think we need to understand that everybody getting along, following laws and everything is not law enforcement's job. It's all of our jobs together. Law enforcement is there when people just aren't following the rules. But right now we're kind of relying on them for even the littlest thing to the biggest thing. And we're not happy with any of it that they're doing right now, which is doubly challenging if you're a law enforcement officer these days.
Well, and Julia, she mentions a unique, Julia, I'm sorry. She mentions a unique issue with NYPD that she's got up there in New York City. And she says that new department policy whereupon if a police officer presses on the sternum of the defendant during a lawful arrest, the officer will be charged with a felony. And I think this is absolutely insanity right now. I mean, I don't know how you take the injuries to officers. Like one of the things they did, Glenn, I don't know if you saw the video that NYPD put out, but you can't put your knees on a suspect anymore. So you got to put your knees on the ground. And I just wonder if that means that the NYPD is going to furnish knee pads to everybody, because as you know, fighting with a violent suspect on the ground, your knees are going to get destroyed potentially fighting this guy. So, a lot of people just don't want to be arrested. Let's be honest. I mean, they just don't want to be put in handcuffs and don't want to be put in the back of a patrol car. But again, I have nothing in my tenet as a law enforcement officer when I was one that says that I have to risk my safety and security so that you can safely resist arrest, right?
Right. Absolutely. And one of the challenges in law enforcement today we're seeing is the number of law enforcement injuries and the number of situations you see. Law enforcement officers, by and large, don't feel like their agencies, the public, have their backs. And so we're starting to see officers that are hesitating. And hesitating in a critical incident, a deadly force incident, is what's going to get you killed. And it's horrible to see that, where you see how many people we've seen lately. We're always talking about all these videos we're seeing, but they're all over this. Social media is a living, breathing force right now, and it's something we have to work with head on. But how many videos do you see of the subject with a knife being tasered, and that taser not doing the job, and the officer getting stabbed or killed because in a deadly force incident, they, in their mind, said, I'm not sure that I don't want to be that next person. I don't want to be that next guy. I don't want to be the next girl that's going to be on the news and causing the riot. And they're risking their personal safety when they know that's a deadly force incident, and they should engage it as such. So you're starting to see that hesitation, that reluctance to use that, which is getting a lot more officers hurt. And it's really making the situation worse. And that's where we've got to kind of get together as a society and kind of reset ourselves and like, hey, what do we want from law enforcement? What do we want them to do? They're not signed up to not come home at the end of the shift. And I can't tell you in my years of law enforcement and the military how many law enforcement funerals I've had to go to for people that have been ambushed. I think that was my first law enforcement funeral when I was a Boy Scout. When I was 12, we had an officer, and my father was a police officer in a little tiny agency of 16 officers. One of their officers was ambushed and murdered with a 12 gauge outside a bar one night. That was my very first law enforcement funeral. And I don't know how many I've gone to since then, but it's the ambushes. It's, you saw the Seattle cruiser with the flaming stick, burned to a crisp and things like that. So it's really a struggle with law enforcement on how do we get the upper hand? How do we get the trust of the public back? And so I wish I had a good answer for that, but that's one of the things we're really struggling with, and we're losing lots of cops as a result of that, I think.
Yeah. Great response. Alan says the response of law enforcement may be unpopular, but lawlessness cannot be totally tolerated. But we in law enforcement are in some ways being restrained beyond the point of reasoning. Let's also get another. Gilly is on from the Philippines. Good morning, Gilly. Okay, I got another question for you. Now, this one I don't think I'd sent you over in our pre-show, but it has become kind of popular on the show, Glenn, and that is the idea of best day, worst day. If you could share with us your best day and perhaps your worst day, sir.
Well, I would say my best days, and I've actually been lucky enough to have a couple of them, are the days that we were able to recover. One of them was a child that had been abducted by a relative. We were able to essentially get them within a few hours unharmed. That's one of the best days. One of the other ones is we were able to actually successfully get a teenager out of a sex trafficking circle. And that's a challenge to get somebody out of that life and to keep them out of that life. And one of the agents I work with, she was absolutely just amazing in making contact with these victims, and we were able to actually get her out of that. And she goes around and does speaking for the Bureau right now on her experiences and things like that. So I would say a couple different of those of best days. I would say my worst day was probably, I guess now it's about 5 years ago now, and one of our local officers in an off-duty accident in a rainstorm. Brought up some fresh oil off the road and stuff like that. He and his wife killed in the accident. Their children hurt very badly, and I think of Mark basically daily. And we'd actually had a great conversation 2 days just before they had this weekend accident. So I got that call at like 3 a.m. from the PD on what that had happened, and that just to see that happen to his family. It was off duty and everything like that. Certainly, we've had lots of talked about, law enforcement funerals, and those are all horrible too. But that was one that specifically touched me because I knew Mark very well. He's super nice guy, been a canine handler, been a great partner. I'd been going through doors with him, guns out and everything like that. And just to know that he was just gone was that was a bad day.
I can relate. I've lost a few friends in combat, and I know it's never, ever, ever easy. Let's talk, moving back to the law enforcement, Glenn. What is the state of law enforcement in America today? Do you have a pulse on that?
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of a catch-all phrase, but I really do think that the policing is in crisis right now. We don't have the general public support. We've got prosecution challenges in different areas, and what level of support, what we want to do with law enforcement. You've got, again, the use of force issues where you have law enforcement officers questioning. And what do we talk to everybody that's not law enforcement? We talk about your intuition, paying attention to your gut, go back to your training, understand when you need to deal with something in a deadly force way and not hesitate and make that decision quickly. And everything that's surrounding law enforcement officers is forcing them to question that right now, which is challenging. I mean, right now it's very difficult to be in law enforcement. It's very difficult to maintain a positive outlook. You've got a suicide rate of law enforcement officers that's 40% greater than your average citizen out there. I mean, we're still losing 22 veterans a day to suicide as well. So from all those different aspects, it's kind of, is it a war on law enforcement? Maybe I don't really know how to term that, but it is a significant challenge, and we're kind of forcing an evolution of law enforcement. But I think there's some things that we can see. There's technology. We talked about that a little bit before. There's ways that we can utilize the great advances in technology these days. Integrated technology. It's no longer just the pan, tilt, zoom camera that's out there with somebody watching the camera. You've got camera systems that are integrated, that can identify things, can send alerts and things like so. There's significant technology upgrades from gunshot detection systems and in schools and things like that. So there's a lot of that kind of can assist law enforcement as we try to get back to, okay, what's really of the core that we want our law enforcement to do. We're almost kind of going through, we don't really want law enforcement to make contact with people, and we have to. And we start to see how many subjects, crimes you identify by that seemingly innocuous traffic stop, where you've got a little narcotics in the car and that builds and that builds and that builds and that develops into, hey, all of a sudden we seize $100,000 and 100 pounds of meth or something like that. But without those contacts, without that, and it's, in a way, I think we're kind of wanting to go back to community-oriented policing, the good and bad through that. But a lot of this comes back to is, if the cop knew their beat, if they were given the resources to basically, we know what's going on in the neighborhood. I know the people to talk to get information are. I know what looks normal in the neighborhood. I know what is outside the normal, as we talked about in our webinar series. What are your normals? If you were able to have that conversation within that neighborhood, within the areas where you work with law enforcement, but we're sort of forcing law enforcement as a society to drive by with the windows up, the air conditioning on. Yeah, it's easier to hear the radio, I'll give you that. But we're really trying to insulate ourselves from law enforcement until we want them. And as a society, that's kind of hard to do. And I realize I'm talking to folks in the American Warrior Society. A lot of you are law enforcement and you support law enforcement. I realize, but as you look around you, that's kind of what the general society is doing right now. So it's really kind of a critical point in policing where we've got to adjust. I think there are good things that are coming out. We're getting additional mental health training, but again, you've got a law enforcement officer. There's only, you make them a jack of all trades, you kind of become a master of none. And we rely so heavily on what they can do. They can't do everything. We've got to provide them some support. And maybe if there's areas that we can carve out, one, with technology, and two, with additional people. We've always talked about, when we talk about the active shooters that we've experienced. We always talk about the lack of mental health resources around the country. You know, we live in a rural area here. The lack is significant here, but it's significant all around the country. Social service, mental health resources, and things like that can really contribute to getting somebody off what we would call a pathway to violence. We don't want to arrest them. We want to stop them way before something like that happens. And it's difficult right now in law enforcement to make proactive stops and things like that right now. So it's a challenging time for law enforcement. So kudos to you folks that are still out there wearing the badge every day. And you're doing absolutely what you need to do and what we as society need you to do. So keep it up and keep your chin up for that.
Yeah, agreed. You mentioned technology, and I kind of worry about maybe an over-reliance on technology. I know we saw that in the military, and we saw that in the intelligence community where there was an over-reliance on technology. And it reminds me of in January of this year, we were in Ireland and the UK bouncing back and forth quite a bit before the pandemic lockdowns. And they have, I don't know how long it's been since you've been over there, Glenn, but they have these trucks about every few blocks, and they've got cameras on all four corners. And there was back in January signs on these police vans that say, don't cover your face as you go by. And people were like, and I'm like, what the heck is this? It's facial recognition. Mm-hmm. And that's what they say on the side of it. And so one of the popular shirts in the UK was "Make Orwell Fiction Again." So I think in some regard, I wince every time I hear people talk about technology, because I think there's a really grassroots movement, to your point about community policing. I think there's a lot that we can do there that is not technology related. I'll throw back to a gentleman we just had on the show recently, Joe Saunders from the Managing Violence podcast. He was our guest on the most recent show. And one of the things he said that I tend to agree with is that communication is its own martial art.
Yeah.
And I think we need to look at it that way. I think we need to do better training with our law enforcement officers that way, to reason with unreasonable people. A lot of these videos, I chuckle because, the officers are they're doing everything right. They're really, trying to communicate effectively with this other person, and that other person is completely unreasonable. They're not hearing it, and they will not give an inch. Let's get some points here. If you have a question for Glenn, please throw it in here. One of the questions that came in from my brother, Jeff Brown, and he was in law enforcement with me here in Tennessee and retired as a maritime law enforcement officer with the United States Coast Guard. Jeff says, the question I have is, what does it look like when the pendulum swings back the other way, if it ever does? What say you, Glenn?
Yeah, and where we are right now, I don't know that the pendulum's ever going to come all the way back. I think we've gone so far this direction. I think we've kind of broken the pendulum a little bit. I think we're going to swing back. We'll have a little bit, perhaps a little bit of a lockdown, maybe to use a somewhat descriptive term there. But I don't think we're going to ever come back to where we as a society I want to be have enough heavy-handed, I guess is the best way to put it. So yeah, I think we've kind of broken that pendulum. I think it'll come back a little bit. I guess right of the middle, and kind of hopefully settle back in the middle there. But I do. Technology, there's benefits to that, but I'm also, especially I always had this when we were running command posts, setting up command posts. You can have internet access, you can have computers, you can have everything like that. But when the power goes out, you got to have those 3 binders and a pencil and paper and ready to go and do that. And you've got to start with that capability. And that's where then technology, you can kind of identify where that can take some of the things off your plate. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Communication, which is the first thing that goes sideways in a crisis, right? But how effective you can communicate with people that don't communicate like yourselves, whether they're deaf, whether they're autistic, whether they're mentally challenged or have some things like that. A lot of education for not only just law enforcement of how to how to identify and see indicators of how somebody may have these type of issues that they're contending with. But everybody, all of us, I think one of the challenges, I think we kind of talked in some of the pre-interview questions about what are things that we can do out there. I think everybody could benefit by some training in how to communicate effectively, de-escalation training. Like I said, everybody's going out there itching for a fight. Okay, well, what ideally I'd like you to go out and do is, okay, here's how I keep myself out of a fight, and here's I can use that verbal judo, to use the old phrase, to keep myself out of that. Here's how I can de-escalate things. And we're doing training for law enforcement. I think that's great, but I think as a society as a whole, if we could actually try and learn some of that and practice some of that, I think we'd be a whole lot better off.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to touch on a couple of things that you brought out there, Glenn. You talked about when the power goes off. This is actually one of the first things I ever got published. I wrote an article for the Marine Corps Gazette on moral and ethical decision-making in junior officers. And it's actually now part of the curriculum at, I believe, the University of Michigan's NRTC program. But the idea of building leaders that can make moral and ethical decisions when the radios are off, because you can't always get higher headquarters, as you know. And so you're left with the 6 inches between your ears to make those decisions in the heat of the moment. Decisions that the best prosecutor in the land would agonize over for months if he had time to make them. You're going to have to make them in a split second without anything coming from above. So it's a very unique problem set that I saw it in my 23 years in the Marine Corps, Glenn, where I was a chief warrant officer, so I had risen through the ranks to gunnery sergeant. Then I'd crossed over, went to Quantico, became an officer, came back and spent another 9 years on the dark side. And so I saw the young lieutenants coming in, and I'm like, man, I don't know if it's millennials, if it's a generational thing, but it was certainly, they didn't necessarily have the cultural ethos that we had in the Marine Corps. And it was a constant, hey man, some of your ideas are concerning. And I'll give you one vignette just as an example, because you're like, Rich, what are you talking about? There was a captain who was otherwise a really good officer, and I had published guidance that I served in a major's billet. So captains, although technically outranked me, they worked for me, which is kind of a unique situation. So I published guidance that, look, do not under any circumstances have females remove part of their garments in order to discern what kind of tattoos they have. If it's covered, the tattoo is covered by their PT gear, their physical training attire, the shorts and a t-shirt. Right. Don't have them remove it. Just have them draw a description of what it is on a piece of paper. Tell me what it means, because it could mean something different. It could be an image of a dolphin. Well, it signifies the dolphins jumping over the rainbow, and that's my mother crossing the bridge and going into heaven. Okay, great. That's fine. That's innocuous. So he calls me and says, "Hey, Rich, I've got some pictures of this young lady's tattoos. I want you to review and tell me if they're appropriate." I'm like, okay. I click on this link, Glenn, and there before me stands a 17-year-old partially nude female. And he has sent me digitized images of this young woman, this child, and her panties and bra. And of course, I was like, oh my God, I'm deleting it, and I'm jumping on the phone. Like, what have I told you? He's like, well, I had a female Navy corpsman take the photographs. I'm like, yeah, pal, but right. So, and we went round and round, and he still didn't think, that there was anything wrong with that decision. And that was one of the many decisions that drove me to, how do we develop young leaders that can make good decisions? So all the technology in the world wasn't helping him right then with his poor decision making. And I want to touch on one final thing, Glenn. And have you read the book Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell?
I have not.
Yeah, you brought up some great points about how we communicate in the community. Specifically, what made me think of this, you said something like people that don't necessarily think like you, that doesn't have the same background like you do. It's a really solid point that you make. And Malcolm Gladwell explores that in his book, Talking to Stranger. And he starts the book off with the Sandra Bland incident down in Texas. Mm-hmm. So you have Sandra Bland, for those of you who don't remember, I won't go into the whole story. She's a African-American female from Chicago who comes to rural Texas to get a job at a university. Her first day there, after accepting the position, she's pulled over by a white cisgendered male from rural Texas, and these two people's cultures clash on a dash cam video, and Sandra Bland commits suicide a few days later in her cell. So he really dissects that, along with a lot of other instances where we just don't communicate well, and how can we communicate more effectively. So I would encourage you to check that book out. I mean, I don't know that we can overstate the point about communication, can we?
No, absolutely not. And how often do we make just a snap decision on one or two pieces of data, as opposed to maybe taking a step back and looking at the whole situation? And I think of this for armed citizens out there. If you're going to engage in a situation, make sure you understand the situation first before you kind of step in the middle of something and like, wow, this is not at all what I thought this was. And trying to extricate yourself out of that is very, very challenging. But yeah, communications, we're very quick to make decisions. We, look at our phone, make a decision based on just something we see on our phone, and really without really working the communication angle. And communication is so important, especially when you're talking about leadership. You've got to understand your people, and to your incident there with the cell phone pictures and stuff like that. To me, that's somebody that they got wrapped up in the technology, and that is actually always a challenge. That they got completely wrapped up in, hey, here's this great technology, I can do this. That is absolutely a decision that should have been in that 6 inches. And how to do that, and how do I support my people? And I need to understand, I need to communicate effectively with the people that are under my command and the people that I work for that are above me in the chain of command, to understand it. And what's my overall goal? And I think that's one of the things we see that is becoming more and more of a challenge. And I don't know whether it's generational, whether it's technology. We're a very technology focused society. That's one of the things we talk about in this webinar series is get your head out of your phone, especially in these times. Phones are great tools and great toys, but you got to get your head out of your phone. You got to talk to people. And we talk about, how people are we don't like to call each other on the phone anymore. We text each other. Okay, there's some level of efficiency that you can have with that, but we're really starting to it's becoming a lost art of communication. And being able to do that effectively, we have a hard enough time doing that between, spouse and yourself, or you and your kids. I've got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. So, communication isn't always as effective as I'd like it to be but we're kind of losing that art with all the interest in technology right now. So it does great things, but yeah, we got to focus kind of on the basics. And then leadership is all about taking care of your people and putting your people before you. And we've got to kind of do small building blocks. I can think of, a whole variety of brand new, butter bars, second lieutenants coming in to the office, for a while. I served as executive officer for a while. So I was kind of in that position as a junior captain, where most of my compatriots were field grade officers and things like that. But you would see the new lieutenants come in and really not have any type of understanding of the sergeant or the senior airman that they were working with, and what they bring to the table, or the chief master sergeant that they're working with, and trying to understand their years of experience. We can learn from each other, and we've got to do that.
Absolutely. Dr. Fuller, another retired FBI agent. Good morning, Dr. Fuller. He says Gladwell's book is worth reading. Gerald says, please add that book to the AWS reading list. I'm working on an American Warrior Society reading list. I'm an avid reader, as most of you folks know. Julie says self-defense is a right, correct? Talk as you videotape, as your self-defense, use technology for your safety and defense. Yeah, technology can do some amazing things, with route selection and some of these other pre-planning things that you can do. But I would tell you, to your point, Glenn, you talked about a lot of people text now, and texting isn't talking, right? I mean, right. And even still, like, talking face to face is the best way to do it. And one of the things that when Mike Seekland and I teach a firearms instructor development class, it's a week-long class. And one of the things that we do is I prove to the students through a variety of things that are almost like mentalism, how you communicate with your body more than you think you do.
Oh, yeah.
I know that, the study says 50-something% of the communication is nonverbal. And what does that look like? And is that true? Well, I don't know. There's a couple of peer-reviewed studies that seem to indicate numbers like that. But I think that to that point about communicating with your bodies more than you think you do, I would turn you back to, if you're watching this morning, Rory Miller has some really cool books on that. When you think of predation, how does a predator view you? And that's important, what you're communicating to that person that may look at you as a victim, how to not be that guy, stop getting pre-selected. But another point is, and this ties together a couple of things. I was having a conversation with another former Fed recently, and he was saying, this some of the things that are going on in some of the cities have all the hallmarks of an insurgency. And we kind of talked about that a little bit, and how America's coin strategy, that counterinsurgency strategy, can be used. And one of the things that a former boss of mine did in Iraq was he had his Marines patrolling in soft covers, like take some of the body armor off, look like a less of a threat. If you're walking around like a stormtrooper, they're going to throw bricks at you. And what they found was, if you take a softer approach, it can often communicate something to the populace, that we don't fear you. We're here to be part of the solution. We're not going anywhere. I mean, there's been papers written on this stuff. We saw the same thing in Northern Ireland as the law enforcement ratchets up. And you have to do force protection, right, Glenn? But as you ratchet it up, the citizenry, and you are in this arms race, if you will. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's that we've got to be able to, but we've got to be able to maintain safety as law enforcement. So how do we de-escalate from kind of where we are right now? And I saw in one of the comments, you can't reason with somebody when they're there spitting in your face. And one of the things that I think we're seeing, so I've read several different assessments of folks, former military, law enforcement going in and just kind of seeing what's up with some of the rioting and some of the civil unrest in there. And one of the things that I see consistently throughout is the people are so worked up. There's so much of a frappe. There's so much in a frenzy in a lot of these things. And you have people that are out there to protest peacefully, and then you have all the predators that are out there using that as cover to do that. But you have the people that are, protesting peacefully they've got their minds wrapped around it. So you can't even talk logic to them. It's impossible to talk them down with a logical point, because they're beyond that. And how do we back them off of that? I mean, there's people that are living for that, and that are certainly are anarchists and Antifa out there that are using that all to their advantage, and we're kind of falling for it. But once you get to that point, you've got to be able to get them to back off, and trying to make contact with them is virtually impossible. You can't reason with them right now. And as we talk about the civil unrest, and to the extent that I think a lot of us see civil unrest as a very unorganized kind of mob and stuff like. There's a lot of organization to these things, especially when you start talking on the predatory side of that, where there are clearly plans in action. There are people that, and we've seen what was, I think of the person in the white Prius that kind of had contact, and they got chased down by the pickup truck. There's folks, Antifa, that are using drones. They're following people. They have a plan to attack you and follow you 15, 20, 30 blocks, where, we generally drive away a block or two, kind of look behind us. Okay, we're good. No. You're on camera. You are still in the fight, and you've just let your guard down, and now you're very vulnerable to that. But trying to reason with somebody that's in that we've got to figure out a way. This is kind of a whole de-escalation conversation we had. We've got to figure out a way where we can at some point communicate on even the most basic levels. Like I don't want to sit here. I don't want to sit here in full body armor, full riot gear and everything like that, and have you yelling at my face, telling me all the horrible things and that you want to happen to me and my family and all those type of things. We've just lost kind of all sensibility when we get to that point. And how do we back off of there? That's the challenge right now. How can we back off and have some level of a basic civilized discussion, because until we get there, we can't communicate at all. And we're just going to be at odds. We're not going to solve the issue, I think, until we can kind of get past that, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. TC asks, how many of the new agents in your office did you have to run out of the office to get them to do actual interviews at the end of your career, instead of working their entire case via database searches?
More than I care to mention. I will mention one specific thing as we talk about that. It's a little bit of a tangent to that, but we did have one new agent in the office got a flat tire. He was early 20s, and this is maybe 15 years ago now. Early 20s. He called in on the radio and asked if he was supposed to call the California Highway Patrol to help him with a flat tire. At that point, I think 2 or 3 of us jumped up, hopped in our cars, went down, pulled to the side of the road, made him change the flat tire, which he had never done before. But yeah, there's some of the things that I think folks my age take for granted and things like that. And communication is that same way. Yeah, I can run all these database checks. I can do all this. I could text this person. I can text my source. I can do that. We've got to be able to communicate. And those nonverbals are huge. And I think about nonverbals too. Think about vehicular nonverbals. And we talk about this in this whole webinar series thing too. And it's in situational awareness in that aspect is, okay, so you see the car that has the driver's ed placard, sign, sticker, whatever it is. What do? Nobody wants to be, right around that car, right? You don't, I think, in winter weather here, you don't want that car to be behind you. You certainly don't want it to be in front of you. So most everybody, if you've got the lane coverage, is going to speed up and just get past that car. But that's a vehicular nonverbal. And there's so many things as we're moving around that if your head's up, you see. You're not necessarily communicating, but you can get a whole lot of information about what everything is going on. And the conversation is absolutely the same way. That's webinars. Webinars are challenging. You can generally see the speaker, but as the speaker, you really don't get a whole lot of feedback unless you got the chat function and stuff like that. All those nonverbals, are people paying attention? Are they looking at their phones? Are they doing it? And you've got to be able to bring that to make your decisions. We make decisions without all that information we could have, especially when you do it like over the phone. That's why you see some police agencies are going to text, E911. It's not optimal. It's a basic communication platform, but there is so much you lose by not having a conversation with a dispatcher who's been trained on how to communicate and how to listen, which is a huge, huge part of communication is the listening. And we don't do the listening so much these days. We're kind of we're all talk. We don't really like that input. We don't want to assess. We're just always talking, kind of like I'm doing right now. I'm kind of going on and on and on and not pausing for breath or anything like that. But we've got to be able to listen too. And that's a huge part of communication we're missing these days.
Man, I completely agree with you that the art of listening is, I always just said a good salesman sells with their ears. You don't sell with your mouth. If you're listening to what the person that walked onto your car lot or whatever, listen for the language of needs. What are they trying to improve or accomplish? And then if you can give that to them, then they're probably going to make a buying decision. Well, I think it's no different than communicating in the street as a law enforcement officer. And I think to your point about, having to get agents out and about, as an investigator in the Marine Corps, Lisa, my wife, will tell you, I was constantly traveling because I want to be there on the ground. I want to look at somebody in the face and tell them. And I remember this one Marine that I was interviewing. I mean, he Academy Awards pal. I mean, he was amazing when he lied to my face and had me believing it. It's probably the only time that I'm like, now that guy's innocent, and he was definitely guilty. He ended up becoming a witness for the prosecution. But but again, more often than not, though, talking to people is definitely the way to go. Speaking of the lawlessness, we've kind of gotten around it a little bit, Glenn. I would just ask you, where is all this going? And you can take it anywhere you want, Glenn, with regard to the COVID lockdowns, the response to that. You could talk about with Mr. George Floyd and some of the other things that are going on, the election and things that are going on. Where is all this lawlessness going in 2021 and the future?
Yeah, and I think we experienced, I guess, almost say you call it the perfect storm, except just in the opposite way. Everybody, we were kind of bottled up. Everybody's kind of sequestered, quarantine, whatever you want to call it, with COVID, and that lasted a while. And I believe that George Floyd, that was the straw at that point. We were so frustrated by being cooped up and not being able to do what we consider to be normal. We didn't have toilet paper. That was not one of the things that I was expecting we were going to have issues with at the first. So that even caught me off guard, and I'm the preparedness guy. So it was interesting. So it was interesting to me to see just how people were affected by this down to their core. It was just shocking to me how quickly, and clearly, we talk about in manufacturing, you talk about just-in-time delivery. That apparently is what, most everybody does with toilet paper, for the example there. Mm-hmm. But it was just so quickly as we deteriorated, and we're just trying to keep ourselves. I'm just trying to keep myself there, and all that frustration, all that builds up, and then we have the horrible George Floyd incident, and that was the straw, like I said, at that point, and people just snapped, and we're expressing our frustration to do that. And now you compound that, we've got the election, and we're all feeling a little bit of angst right now, right? As to what's going to happen with that. So you put all those things together, and like we talked about earlier, everybody's pissed, everybody's mad, everybody's frustrated, everybody's feeling like what they've known as kind of their rock is crumbling around the edges. And that's where you're starting to see we're starting to lose confidence as a society. We've had these, civil unrest been going on for how long in Portland? We've had Chaz in Seattle. We've had all these things that, how does this happen? How does this happen? That tells me that, at a very base level, our confidence is shaken in the process, in government, and certainly I'm a Fed, so I know that there's lots of people that don't like the federal government, and I understand that, but there are places in there, and that's one of the things we're starting to see. There's a reluctance, same reason that you have lots of cops that are getting injured these days, because they don't feel like their agency or their prosecutor or their community has their back right now. And so you're going to continue to see some of this lawlessness until we can come to some middle ground. What that middle ground looks like, I really don't know yet. But we've got to be able to back off of where we are and say, okay, let's hit the reset button. the old video game thing. All right, I get killed, so I'm just going to hit the reset button, so we're good now. But we've got to be able to kind of back off, and we've got to take a tactical pause, if you will, I think, to kind of reset where we can have civilized discussion and have productive discussions, rather than the lawlessness, rather than somebody in the civil unrest that is there because they want to try and make things better. But unfortunately, they're so wrapped up into that they're actually making it worse at the time. So I think, we're going to have this lawlessness for a while. I think regardless of what the results are of the election, we're going to have issues for several months to come. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, and certainly, American Warrior Society, we've got a plan. We've got to make sure we're looking to see what's going on around us. We're paying attention. We're paying, that's always the challenge of, like the Department of Homeland Security, their terror codes. We want keep your eyes open wider. Okay, yeah, keep them wider again still. But we've got to pay attention to what's going on around you. There's kind of a diminishing law of returns. The wider your eyes open, they just don't blink anymore, and you can't sustain that, of course. But we've got to pay attention. We've got to try and work slowly, painfully slowly, I think, for us to try and get to where we can start to have those productive discussions. But I think, over the next few months, you're out in public, you're out moving around, you're traveling, things like that. Pay attention. I think that's really going to be key for everybody. Take a look at your kit. And I know Mr. Seeklander put an article out a week ago or so talking about the change of seasons. Here in Tahoe, that's a pretty significant thing sometimes when you start talking the winter. So think about what you've got. Think about your training. I know friends that the old saying, if it ain't raining, we ain't training. Well, train for what you got, whether it's heat and humidity or whether you got 3 feet of snow to deal with, and think about that. But over the next few months, I think paying attention to what's going on around us and paying attention to those nonverbals of people, of society moving around, I think that's what we need to do to kind of keep ourselves hunkered down, for lack of a better term, for a little while, and just make sure we're being proactive and keeping ourselves safe and secure.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that you mentioned there, the Homeland Security, keep your eyes open wider kind of thing. But really, I mean, I think you have to have an individual plan. And of course, that's what your webinar series is designed to help folks with. And certainly American Warrior Society is designed to help Americans with that too, because you are your own first responder, right, Glenn? I mean, right. What are you going to do? Wait for Homeland Security to show up? Good luck with that. That you have to be your own first responder, because when police are just minutes away, the second takes the situation you find yourself in probably going to be resolved by the time they get there. They're going to just take the report. So it's definitely, I want to talk to something that Matt just posted. Matt says all of us LE trainers are also scratching our heads as to where we go from here. Boy, that is very true.
Yeah, absolutely. And and that can from current law enforcement training to academies. And I've read a few articles lately talking about what is the focus in, identifying people with the proper mindset to be law enforcement officers, to how are we training them? How do we train them in communications? How do we, we're certainly working through what physical training, as far as what tools we have towards violent offenders, what we're doing. We certainly, I think most academies now have a mental health course or two rolled into their academies, 10, 12 hours, something like that for that as well. But yeah, it's tough right now, because you've got to think a lot of times I think defensive tactics, you're training somebody to save their own life from somebody who's trying to kill them. And you've got somebody that's highly motivated, and now we're saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. If you do this, you might get sued, but it could save your life. And we've got to be able to reconcile that with what we've got today. We've got to be able to do training so we can keep our officers, deputies, agents safe out there. And that's something that we're starting to back off on. And that backing off, I think, is opening up a whole lot more risk to that. And I think about we're talking about just being ready. And yes, you have first responders, uniformed law enforcement and fire services and things like that. But yeah, and that's when you're on the X, you're kind of what I always termed as an instant responder. And one of the things we talk about in really the basic course here is the mindset portion of it. And it is so empowering if you can change the mindset to say, hey, I need to call these people to come help me, and say, no, that's what am I going to do to save myself before the cavalry gets here? So when they get here, they don't really have anything they need to do to save me. What am I going to do to save myself? And that's immensely empowering to somebody who's never thought that way before. But we've got to integrate that with everybody these days, I think.
Yeah, totally. And Alan has a point here. He says, like TC said in an earlier show, you get the training and the officer that you pay for. So if you're like here where I live in Tennessee, this particular county, believe it or not, Glenn, starting salary is $25,000 a year.
Yeah.
So what kind of officer do you think you get for $25,000 a year? Right. I mean, no disrespect to the folks that are out there doing amazing things, but I mean, let's be honest.
Right. And I think a lot of times we've looked at is, law enforcement is something once you get your GED or your high school diploma, law enforcement is something that you're completely qualified for. And what we're asking from law enforcement these days is so far beyond that. And yeah, and absolutely, the wages have not caught up with what we're expecting to do. I mean, God, we're talking about defunding right now, right? We're talking about trying to cut, but yet we want more performance, more capability out of these officers that we're not paying for. So one of the things you see now is you see officers that they're doing as much overtime as they can, right?
Yeah.
And it's so which is a good money, but at the same time, you've got a challenge. If you got an officer that works a full week and then works 30 hours of overtime that week, you've got some fatigue issues,
Yeah.
and you've got some mental conditioning as to, let alone physical, how to maintain that. And I know cops that have been doing that for years, and they're 35, but yet they look like me as a result of that. And they're just trying to make ends meet. So that's absolutely, something we've got to be able to fix to attract the right people that want to learn more, want to become more educated, better trained, better equipped to deal with what we're asking them to do. But that's a long way to go, because we're really trending in the opposite direction right now.
Yeah, we are, and they're very explicit. This defund the police movement is insane, because to your point about cops working side jobs, one of my training partners, what he does is he takes all the side jobs he can get, and you know what he does with the money from the side job? It doesn't go into the family pot. It goes into paying for his jujitsu. It goes into paying for training ammunition, because he doesn't get it from his department. So we keep seeing this like, hey, go figure it out, cop. I just don't think that's the right approach. And, I don't know what the right answer is. And I'm sure you could get a PhD trying to figure that one out, but it certainly isn't defunding, right?
Right.
Let's talk about, see here, questions. John says, where can we find the webinar series that Glenn is referencing? If you check in today's show notes, you'll see Glenn's email in there, and you'll also find a link to where you can find out about the training that Glenn is providing. TC says, these days, if I can make more working at Lowe's or Walmart, why would I get into law enforcement? I agree with you. I don't think that I would certainly not steer my kids. My brother and I were both cops and Marines, but would I steer my family members or someone I love into that profession these days? I don't know, Glenn. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough, and I've always thought of myself as the helper, the protector. That's kind of been my shtick, since I was in Boy Scouts way back in the day, and that's kind of something core, which I think I got from my dad, who was that guy back in the day. My father was older, so he was 56 when they had me. Spent 7 years overseas in World War II, and that was just the core of that. But right now it's hard to encourage that. My 15-year-old, he wants to be a PJ, and power to him, but it's tough to try and see where we are in society. I mean, especially when you think of law enforcement. But yeah, we've got to try and identify those folks. And I saw a couple comments related to that. We've got to try and identify folks that have kind of that at their core. They want to do that, because you've got to get paid for that at a commensurate wage to that without working a lot of overtime. And so you're going to make sacrifices. You're going to make sacrifices with your family. Your family's going to make sacrifices with you as well. And trying to identify who can do that. We've got to try and that's one of the challenges I see right now is communities and law enforcement are at odds. Yeah. Ideally, the law enforcement is the best part of your community. They are embraced by the community, they're supported by the community, and they're doing what the community wants. And that's, again, I think we've got to take that tactical pause to try and say, what do we want from law enforcement? Because we owe them more, quite frankly, as a society right now, I think. But my background, so there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you were talking, Glenn, I was thinking about, man, would I really dissuade someone I cared about from getting into a career in law enforcement? And all of a sudden it dawned on me, and my son, who is kind of like your son, he wants that. And I kind of gently nudged him into something. Well, he really loved computers, Glenn. And so one of the things we did was like, but he wants to be that guy. So I said, well, what about cybersecurity? Somebody has to protect our nation and our nation's secrets. So Monday, for example, this coming Monday, my son will be lecturing at MIT, and he's a grad student, and he's created some really interesting cybersecurity technology that will keep hackers from being able to control our vehicles and do some other things. So there's a lot of ways that people can serve nowadays, and maybe not put their, spend the rest of their life in prison for making a bad use of force decision.
Right. And there's absolutely so many different ways that people can help, but and we need all those different things to go forward. And I'm going to give props to my wife, who's now up and is looking at me crazy because I'm sitting here, been talking for the last hour or so. She's a school teacher now. She was a field grade officer in the Air Force. We had our big career change when I got into the Bureau. And I talk about being a student of the gun. She is a student of education, 2 master's degrees in education, almost all the way to her educational doctorate. And she understands teaching and the importance of that. And I think there's a huge value in that for the future of our society. We talk about, especially in the American Warrior Society, we talk about preparing ourselves, training, always getting better. Well, it's the next generation. My 15-year-old and I had the wonderful opportunity to attend Gun Sight this summer. It was a wonderful opportunity for both of us, and I got more out of seeing him there than my honing my skills and things like that. It was wonderful for me to see, him taking on that role. And the same thing with the teaching is we've got to invest in our next generation. Without that, we're going to be kind of just circling and kind of in a stagnant level. We've got to be able to take care of ourselves, but also invest into those next generations.
Yeah. And I've been fortunate enough to bring my son along to some of the training that we provided to, Grant has helped work the range for some military groups that we've trained. And it was pretty cool for him to see that. But TC Fuller says those with an educational doctorate are unusually attractive people, Glenn.
Well, Dr. Fuller, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Matt says, fortunately for us, the protectors will continue to join and serve. Those of us who are a little older and wiser should try our best to cultivate and prepare them for that day. I agree with you, Matt, 100%. I think Glenn would agree. Glenn, final question for you, sir. I know I want to be respectful of your time. My gosh, we've been on here for about an hour and a half almost. Nice. But I've enjoyed it, man, and I think our viewers and listeners have too. What are your thoughts and concerns on the coming days, weeks, months? What are some of the things that concern you? And if you have some anecdotes as to how people can prepare, please share those with us as well.
Yeah, sure. And kind of like we touched on before, I think things are going to be unsettled for lack of a much more significant word, but things are going to be precarious for a few months now, related to results of the election, regardless of whichever way it goes, related to, is there a resurgence of COVID? Is there, there's just a lot of angst about all those type of things. So it's going to be challenging for a while. I think even when we get the results of the election, one or the other side is going to do something stupid, quite frankly. I think there are people that are so worked up into they've lost their sense of what's really helping and what's really not, and they are vehement, frothing at the teeth to get their point across. And I think somebody's are going to make statements regardless of that. So that's one of the things I think we really need to be on our toes, keep our eyes open even wider, right? But paying attention to what's going on around us, do a little research in advance, do some advanced planning if you're traveling or something like that. And pay attention to what's going on in the news. As challenging as it is to watch the news a lot these days, use that for a tool to yourself, just to understand what's going on around you. Understand if there's civil unrest in somewhere that you're traveling, you don't want to be that car driving into the thing. With some good advanced planning, you can avoid that. Fine. If you got to take another 10-minute detour or something like that to get out of that situation, potentially being in that situation, absolutely do that. But make sure that your house is in order. Make sure you got the toilet paper and things like that. I don't think we're going to have those issues again. But I think it's important for us to communicate, to plan as we go through the next few months. If you've not had any type of de-escalation training, do that. Don't go out there looking for a fight. And so many people are doing that right now. For the next few months, just back off of that, and you're going to keep yourself that much safer. I guess that would be the big thing that I'm looking at is something's going to happen, I believe, significantly. And I'll even add to the mix that now we're just talking domestically, but understand that everything else that's going on around, everybody else is paying attention to what's going on around us. We are in an extremely vulnerable situation right now, I think, from violent extremists from around the world, from technology compromise, from a variety of different countries out there that are targeting our folks. We're having our own issues right now, and everybody else is paying attention to that. So I think that also goes to the point of just kind of paying attention for the next few months.
Man, I think you're so right. Glenn, one of the things that you bring out in that, in your response there was the threat internationally. We're so inwardly focused right now that we really have closed our aperture down, and we're really only focused on the things that are going on with internally. But remember, I think your point is that there are some bad actors out there that see this time in America as a golden opportunity. And we probably, and I know that the folks, the feds like you were, Glenn, are out there. They're really attuned to that, and thank God that they're standing on the wall for us. I want to get to a couple of comments, Glenn, and then I'll turn it over to you, sir, as to where they can find you. Mark says, great show as usual. Thank you, and be safe. Julie says, great show. God bless you all, and God bless America. Gerald says, thanks for your time. Another great show. Julie says, great advice. Resnick says, awesome show. So, Glenn, where can people find you, man?
Okay, it's pretty simple. It's online at www.trainbeready.com. It's all one word, Train Be Ready. And my company is TBR Consulting, which is actually kind of a play on Tahoe Black Rifle, which is another one of my companies, as well as Train Be Ready, which essentially is the model for that. If you go to trainbeready.com, you can actually see the list of all the different webinars we have out there. My email address, you'll see that in the show notes, is just simply Glenn with 2 N's at trainbeready.com. So I'm happy to answer questions via email like that. Check out the webinar series. It lists what we talk about in each of the different webinars. We've got some specific dates in there, but once we actually do those, we'll have it recorded so you can plug in and listen to it anytime you want. So I thank you very much. Great participation from the audience today. I got to go back later and kind of look through all the questions and comments and everything like that. I appreciate the conversation. I've had a wonderful time talking to you today, Rich, so I appreciate it.
Well, Glenn, if you've had a wonderful time, we'll have to get you back on the show.
Hey, works for me.
Hey, listen, everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you to the 40 plus people that joined us live this morning. Thank you to everybody that's going to watch the replay. Remember to check out all the links to Glenn, as well as the AmericanWarriorSociety.com. Find out how you can become a coin member and get all the access to the training vault you need to keep you and your family safe. And remember, folks, the fight is coming. You ready?